welcome to another video by Jimthecarguy. Today we're going to be working on the 2008. It's an F350 Super Duty. We got a lot of miles on it. We got about 140,000 miles on it. In this case, we're going to be changing the rear brakes, the disc brakes. We're going to be changing the drums. We're going to be changing the backing plate that the parking brake connects onto. But as everybody knows with these vehicles here, sometimes getting the drums off the truck is the hardest part of the whole job. So what I'm going to show you is a trick that I learned quite some time ago, how to get these drums off without pounding the heck out of it with a hammer and a sledgehammer. You know, with this trick here, you'll be able to get these rotors off. It's a little bit of work, but it's really not that bad. It's a lot better than trying to beat it with a hammer. So let's go over there. I'm going to show you what it looks like and how rusty it actually is, and let's get started. All right, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and if you like what I'm doing, give me the thumbs up. So let's get over there and I'm going to show you what's going on. All right, what we got happening here today is we're going to be changing the brake caliper, because the caliper slide pins on the other side were frozen, so we're going to be replacing this one at the same time also. We're going to be changing this bracket here. We're going to be getting this drum off of here. I'm sorry, this rotor. But inside here is the parking brakes, and the parking brakes are staying applied. What happened in this particular case, the reason we have to change the backing plate here is because the pin that holds the parking brake to the backing plate has pulled right through the back of it. It rotted right through. So actually, let me show you what the other one looks like. This is the backing plate from the other side, and as you can see, this one here is still in good shape. But look what happened over here. The whole thing just rotted away. So we have no choice but to change that backing plate. So, all right, let me get started and set some tools up, and let's get to work. Okay, first thing we're going to do is we're going to remove the caliper from the truck the way you normally would remove any caliper. There's a bolt in the back right here. We're just going to take that out. Just so you know, the bolt in the back, it's a 16 millimeter. So we're just going to remove that so we can get the caliper off the car. Truck, I should say. I just want to point out the reason we're doing this one down on the ground is because we have a diamond plate bed on the back of this thing, and we don't want to take a chance on getting it up on the lift and having an issue. All right, we can just take our caliper off the car. We can pry it back a little bit. I'm just going to relocate this over to the side. Normally I would leave this hanging by a piece of wire, such as this, to leave it hanging from here, but in this case we just need to sit it on top of the jack. All right, next thing we're going to do is we're going to take off the mounting bracket in the back right here. You can either do it with a breaker bar, a ratchet, or whatever you've got. And you can break them loose. In this case, I'm going to use an air gun because it's saving me just a couple of minutes. Now, the rotor itself, you can see this thing is stuck on there. It isn't coming off. The alternative you have is you could take a hammer and you could beat the daylights out of it to try to get it out. But anybody who's done this before knows these are a real pain in the you know what, to get them off. So let me show you the trick that I learned, and I'll show you how I do it. What I do is I get a bolt, a real big, heavy-duty bolt, to put it through the bracket right here where the mounting knuckle tabs onto. What I do is let me catch it on here and I'll show you. Screw it in there like that. Same thing on the bottom one. Is you hold this bolt inside here with a wrench and you tighten this bolt down. Just until it comes in contact with the rotor. And do the same thing on the bottom one down here. Tighten it in until it comes in contact with the rotor. I will warn you, when this thing pops off, it's going to come flying off in there. So if you want to put a nut on there to hold it so it doesn't come flying out. And what you just do is you just tighten them up a little bit each time. Anybody who's done this before knows that you can really beat the hell out of this. I mean, beat the heck out of this thing here to get it off. It could be one of the hardest parts of the job. But if you do it like this, it takes a little bit of time, but it actually works really well, as you'll see in a minute. That's the sound you want to hear. Now loose. It beats having to try to heat this thing up with a torch, or beat the heck out of it with a hammer or a sledgehammer or whatever you have. It just takes a little bit of time to get the bolts, but once you have the bolts, you can do it for save yourself a whole lot of time and a lot of work. As you can see by these bolts, I've had these for a long time, and they seem to work really well on these trucks. Now a drum, or I should say rotor, comes right off. What happens, I'm sure you guys all know it, is the face of this gets rusted onto here, and it winds up like concrete. So, all right, let me grab the rest of the tools. We're going to get this backing plate off. The way we're going to do it is we're going to get a probably an 18mm socket. We're going to shoot these bolts off here. If you don't have an air gun, obviously you can do it by hand. And we're going to get this axle out, and we'll continue on that. So let me grab them tools and let's get started. Before I go any further, I just wanted to show you what this actually looks like down in there. You see down there where that pin comes through the backing plate? You can see how it's all rotted away. So that's why we're changing, because that pin is actually pulling right out from the parking brake. You'll see it a lot better once I get it out, but pretty well rotted out. Right. Okay, just want to point out why we're changing that this mounting bracket here, because I get a lot of questions about why you're changing the calipers and why you're changing the mounting brackets. See how this slide pin here slides back and forth just the way it's supposed to? This one here is rusted solid and doesn't move at all. Now you could try to get in here and you could get in there with vice grips. You could put it in your vise. You can, whatever you want to do to try to get it out. You could try to get it out of there, but it's not worth playing around when you're talking about a job like this. That's why I'm changing the mounting bracket as well as the caliper. And the caliper I'm changing because this stayed applied all the time. The brake stayed applied, and it ate up the inner part of the rotor, and did some damage to the rubber boot on the pistons for the caliper itself. All right. So next thing we're going to do is get a bucket underneath here, and then we're going to shoot these bolts out on here real quick. So let me get started on that. Got a bucket underneath the bottom so we don't have any kind of mess on the floor. Let me take these out. Now if you have air, you can do it. If you have a ratchet, you can do that too. Whatever you have will work for you. Hold on to these because you're going to need to reuse them. Then the axle pulls right out. Just pry it a little bit, sometimes they stick. Comes right out. As you can see, you do get some fluid. We're just going to let it drip for a minute, then we're going to pull it out of there, and we're going to relocate that to the side, just out of our way. Take off the axle lock nut here, with a hub lock nut, right? And it's a special socket that you need to do this. It's a socket that actually has these little tabs that pushes it in and unlocks the lock ring on here. So we're going to push it in here like this, and you use a ratchet to remove. Take that lock nut out and just relocate that to the side for now. There's also a wheel bearing in here that needs to come out too. Sometimes these are pretty tight because the rust on the inner part over here. So we're going to take that bearing out and we're going to relocate that to the side too. I'm using to get it out with is just a pick or just something to pull it out. You can use a pick, you can use a screwdriver, whatever you have. Okay, next thing we're going to do is we're going to get that pump off of here if it's true to form like on the other side, it's a little difficult to get it out, so I'm going to get in here with a big pry bar, and I'm going to try to pry it out. The other side was also rough to get out, so we'll just keep working it back and forth until we get it out. Now you can use a big slide hammer on it, but that seems to destroy your shoulders when you're sliding that slide hammer. So it doesn't matter here because I'm going to be changing that inner seal anyway on the hub. So we just keep prying until it comes out. And then we're just going to relocate this to this side because we are going to have a little bit of a mess. So we'll just relocate this for now. See what happens is the inner part of the seal remains on the axle housing itself. So we'll just leave that there for now. And we have to take that inner part of the seal off also, and we'll just pry it off with the big pry bar. Doesn't matter really what happens to these shoes because we're changing the parking brakes too. And I'm going to show you why that seal is so hard to get off. You guys probably know it already. Some of you guys are in the business. But that's what happens is it builds up all of that rust in the back right here, and this seal rusts onto there. So, but it doesn't matter. We're going to clean this up with emery once we get this whole thing apart. Alright, so now the next thing we're going to be doing is we're going to go in the back of the backing plate, and we're going to remove these bolts right here. There's 4 of them that go through here. So let me get some tools and let's get started on that. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to take those bolts out in the back. I think they were 15/16 if I'm not mistaken. So we can use a breaker bar to break them loose. Probably want to put some penetrating oil on it to make it come out a little bit easier. Sometimes they're pretty tight, but in this case it's hard to get in here with an air gun, so we're just going to take them out with this breaker bar and then we're going to get it with a ratchet. Now this backing plate is probably going to be fairly tight, but we're just going to bang it a little bit to get it off, and then we'll remove the parking brake lever, or cable I should say. Going to move this up here so we can get a light over here. I'll show you what I'm going to do. Okay. What we have to do now is we have to remove this parking brake parking brake cable from the back here. So we're going to take this here. We're going to pull this down, and we're going to pull that cable back and out. So let me do that, and then we'll come right back. We just take this out. Now I just want to point this out to you. This cable, once you have it disconnected, there's only one way it can come off. You have to rotate this. If you try to get it off this way, it don't come out. You have to turn it to the top. And then we have it off. And as you can see, the shoes did rip right through the backing plate right here. When I tried to pull them out, they just destroyed the backing plate. So that's why we're a good call changing that. All right, next thing we're going to do is we're going to clean up all of the rust on here. And once we have that cleaned up, I'll grab the new backing plate and I'll show you how to put it back together. So let me do that. We'll come right back. It's going to be a little difficult to show you how to get that seal out, but basically what I do is I just take a chisel and I collapse the seal down like this on the side, and you hit it a couple times, and then just work it around, and it comes out easy. Just get behind the seal and the hub, and you can work it out of there. Seal is out. This we're just going to discard. And the new seal, we just hammer it all the way down. Let me clean this up a little bit. And we'll come right back there. Alright, with the new seal, you just tap it in lightly. When you're tapping it, you can hear the change in the sound, so you know you're in all the way. Plus, it's pretty easy just to look at it and see. All right, so now we got our new seal in. We switched the bearing. We left the bearing in, I should say. Now we're going to start to reassemble it. So let's get down there and put this thing back together, and hopefully get this job out the door pretty soon. Now that we have everything cleaned up over here, we lubricated everything really well. The backing plate comes loaded actually, where you can buy it with the parking brake shoes and the hardware and everything on it, which is exactly how I did it. It actually worked out cheaper getting it as an assembly. All right, next thing we're going to do is we're going to reattach our parking brake cable. And the way we do that is we just hook the cable on first, like this. And we have to pry the spring back, and we'll pry the cable forward. And we're going to slide back in where it belongs like this. It goes in a lot easier than it came out, didn't it? Alright, we'll put this back through here. We'll reattach all of our bolts. The previous one took off. Tight with that. We're going to tighten it up with a breaker bar just to make sure it's tight, and I can't get in there with the air gun. It's tight. Tight to squeeze. Okay. Once we have our backing plate tightened up, the bolts are tight, the parking brake cable is in. Now it's time to put our hub back onto the vehicle. We lubricated everything up really well. Let's lubricate that seal too. And it slides right on because you cleaned everything up really well. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to reinstall the bearing and the lock nut. This little notch right here has to fit into the notch right on the side of the axle tube right here. And then you can turn it in. We're just doing it by hand right now. We're not doing it with a ratchet. Screw it down as far as you can. And snug it down. Now before I go any further, I'm going to go look it up and see what the torque specs are for this nut, and we're going to torque it down. So let me grab the torque wrench, and we're going to get that torqued in there. You can tighten it in by hand, but take the extra time and look up your torque specs so you don't over tighten it or leave it too loose and wind up destroying the bearing. So let me go look it up, and I'm going to torque this thing. Okay. Now that we've got our axle nut torqued down to what it's supposed to be, next thing we're going to do is we're going to reinstall our axle into the housing. And what we're going to do is a seal right on here. We're going to take that seal off, and we're going to get rid of it. We're going to install our new seal on. And the seal's in. Make sure it's lubricated a little bit. And then we can slide the axle back into the housing. And we can reinstall our lock nuts. What I normally do, a lot of guys argue with this fact, but I always put Loctite on the bolts. It had Loctite on them, so I Loctite them back in there just a little bit on each one of them, and then we'll reinstall it. You can air gun them in, you can torque them in, whatever works for you. I'm going to cheat. I'm going to shoot it in with the air gun. Now we got those tight. We tightened them in, but we are going to check them with a torque wrench to make sure that they're torqued correctly. Okay, now we have everything torqued on properly. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to get our drum, slide our drum back on here, and we'll start to wrap this job up. So let me grab the drum, the caliper, and we'll come right back here. Drum's on. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to install our mounting bracket back on over here. What I'm going to do is I'm taking off the caliper off of the mounting bracket right now, and we're just going to mount the bracket first before we do anything else. Now remember, what we said is anything that's got Loctite on it, I usually Loctite it back on again. This has Loctite on it, so we're gonna put some Loctite on these before we put it back together. go through a lot of Loctite. Alright, put your bracket back on. Catch your bolts in here. Before you tighten them up both, screw them in by hand. Alright. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to tighten the bracket. Oops, sorry about that. In this case, we can get in there with the air gun. So we're going to shoot it on with the air gun just to save us a minute or so. Next thing we're going to do we're going to install our brake pads. We always put new hardware on these whenever we put them back together. We're going to lubricate everywhere that the brake pad touches. We're going to lubricate, and then we'll put the pad in where it belongs. That's my brake pad. Okay. Install our hardware onto the second one. Again, we're going to lubricate everywhere that this brake pad touches. We're going to lubricate it. Put it back in there where it belongs. Clips are touching where it's supposed to be. And next thing we're going to do is we're going to install the caliper. And before I switch over the line, the brake line, I'm just going to mount the caliper. So we'll hook the brake caliper onto here. Push your brake pads in, put your slide pins in, catch both of the bolts, top and bottom. Once they're caught, you can tighten them in. Tighten it up then. One. Nice and tight. Just want to point out one thing to you real quick. I just wanted to point out right here the way that this caliper right here, see the slide pin right here, make sure it's lined up correctly on the bottom of the caliper right there, so that this piece here is not catching on that lip down there. Alright, same thing on the bottom. Alright, now we're going to switch over the the line. And the way I usually do it, I pinch off the brake line very lightly with a pair of vice grips, not too tight because you don't want to damage the line. Pinching off very lightly. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to remove the other caliper. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to remove the brake hose from the back of the caliper. Sometimes when the caliper is free floating, it's a little hard to break it loose because it moves around a little bit. But if you just hook it on here like this and just put a screwdriver through it like this, you can break it loose. Okay, I'm going to do it over a bucket because we're going to lose a little bit of fluid. Now, whenever you change a caliper, the new caliper comes with the little washers. Throw away the other ones. Make sure you use your new washers so you don't have any issues with leakage. And then screw it in by hand into the new caliper. And after you catch it by hand, then you can turn it in with the ratchet. But catch it by hand so you don't cross-thread it first. Not too tight because you don't want to snap it. Once you've got your brake line tightened up, you can remove the vice grip that you have on the line. And now what I always do, obviously you're going to need to bleed the brakes, but what I do before I do any bleeding of the brakes, open up the bleeder valve, just leave it open, and it'll start to gravity bleed out by itself. It'll be a little bit easier in the when you do try to bleed it out with your assistant. So now we're just going to let this bleed out a little bit, gravity bleed, and then I'm going to get my assistant, and we're going to go and we're going to bleed this out the right way. All right, let me just go over a couple things, just to recap what I did. All right, we took that mounting, the caliper off. We took that mounting bracket off. We used our bolts. They were the very large bolts to go in the back to pop that rotor off, which worked really well. And if you try it, you'll see. You're going to email me telling me it's the easiest you've ever done. So we'll do that. Then we switched our rotor over. We took our axle out. We took the hub off, changed the hub seals in the back of it. We changed the backing plate, reconnected the parking brake assembly, and put the whole thing back together. All right, now what we're going to do is I'm just waiting for this to bleed out just a little bit. As soon as the fluid starts to come out here, I'm going to close it up. Then I'm going to grab my assistant. We're going to bleed the brakes, and we're going to wrap this job up and get it out the door and move on to the next one. All right, thanks for watching. Drop me a line you want to talk about it, and I'll see you on the next one. Thanks for watching.